The night Nathaniel Whittaker opened his door to a freezing Apache woman, Mercy Crossing decided he had chosen a side. The storm had come down from the north like an old grudge, dragging snow over the roofs, packing ice along the hitching rails, turning every window in town into a yellow square of fear. Nate lived half a mile past the last fence post, where the road thinned into wagon ruts and the prairie stopped pretending it belonged to anybody. Inside his cabin, the fire spoke softly. Coffee sat black in a dented tin pot. His saddle hung by the wall, still carrying the smell of horse sweat and cold leather. He had just reached for another piece of cottonwood when his bay mare gave a hard, nervous breath from the lean-to outside. Nate stopped. Out here, a horse heard trouble before a man did. He took the lantern, opened the door, and the wind shoved snow into his face. At first he saw nothing but white moving sideways. Then a shape near the water trough shifted. A woman stood there, or tried to. Her buckskin coat was stiff with frost. Her dark hair clung in frozen strands against her cheeks. One hand pressed tight around a small leather pouch at her ribs, like whatever was inside mattered more than her own breath. She was Apache. Nate knew it before the lantern found her face. He also knew what that meant in Mercy Crossing, where men could turn a stranger into a danger before the stranger had spoken one word. She looked at the open door, then at the rifle hanging above his mantle, then back at him. Pride kept her upright longer than strength had any right to. "I ain't asking," she whispered. Her English was thin from cold, but steady enough to carry dignity. Nate looked past her shoulder. Far off, maybe 200 yards down the road, 3 lanterns bobbed in the storm. Riders. Not close yet. Close enough. He stepped aside and held the door open wider. "I've got room by the fire." She did not move. Snow gathered on her lashes. "You know what they'll say." Nate's jaw tightened, not with anger at her, but at the town beyond the dark, at every mouth waiting for something small to make ugly. "I don't care who talks." That was when old Porter Vance, half hidden near the fence line with another man from town, shouted through the wind, "You'll answer for this, Whittaker." Nate did not raise his voice. He only looked toward the dark shape of them and said, "Then I'll answer warm." He brought the woman inside and shut the door before the cold could follow. She took 3 steps toward the fire and nearly folded, but caught herself on the back of a chair. Nate did not touch her. Some kinds of help had to leave a person their pride. He laid a wool blanket on the table, pushed a cup of hot coffee within reach, and moved his sidearm from his belt to the shelf, where she could see both his hands were empty. The pouch slipped from her grip then, landing soft on the plank floor. Its tie loosened. From inside slid a piece of map, burned along one edge, marked with fresh charcoal and a smear of dark red mud. Nate stared at it. Black Ash Canyon. He knew that crooked line. He had lost cattle near it twice. The woman saw where his eyes had gone, and for the first time, fear broke through the cold in her face. Outside, a nail struck wood. One hit, then another. Nate turned toward the door. Something had been fastened there from the other side. When he opened it a crack, a scrap of paper trembled in the wind, pinned to his door with a horseshoe nail. 2 words had been written across it in thick black ink, "Apache lover." Behind him, the woman whispered, "Now they will not stop." Nate looked at the note until the ink blurred in the lantern light, then closed the door slow. The fire snapped once between them. "Then we'd better find out why they started." The woman did not sit until Nate stepped away from the chair, and even then she lowered herself like the room might change its mind. Her fingers stayed near the leather pouch on the floor. Her eyes measured everything. The door, the window, the rifle above the mantel, the distance between Nate and the latch. She was not helpless. Cold had bent her, that was all. Nate poured coffee into the tin cup and set it on the table without pushing it closer. "Name?" he asked. She watched the steam rise. "Iona Redwillow." The name settled into the cabin with more weight than the storm outside. Redwillow was not just a family name in these parts. It was a creek, a ridge, a stretch of cottonwood and stone that every landman in Mercy Crossing had been trying to rename for 10 years. Nate nodded once. "Nathaniel Whittaker. Folks call me Nate when they are not angry." Iona gave no smile, but something in her eyes moved, just a small thing, like a coal catching beneath ash. She lifted the cup with both hands. The heat made her fingers tremble. She hated that he saw it. Nate looked at the fire instead. That was the first kindness she believed. Not the blanket. Not the coffee. The looking away. Outside, the wind worried at the paper nailed to his door, making it scratch against the wood like a small animal trying to get in. Iona took one careful sip, then reached for the pouch and pulled the map back into her lap. You should have left me outside, she said. I have made worse choices than opening a door. Those men will not think so. Those men do not think much before breakfast. This time, the corner of her mouth changed, almost enough to become a smile, then vanished. Nate crouched near the fire and laid another split log across the coals. They after you for the missing horses? Her cup stopped halfway to her lips. So the lie is already ahead of me. 3 horses gone from Crowder's stable. 2 from the freight yard. By supper, Silas Crowder was telling everyone Apache tracks ran north. There were tracks, she said. His. Nate turned his head slowly. The firelight drew a hard line across his cheek. You saw him? Iona unfolded the burned map on the table. One edge curled from heat. Mud marked the corner. Charcoal lines cut toward Black Ash Canyon, then stopped near an old wash where the road bent around dead mesquite. I was coming from my mother's camp with medicine plants. Near dusk, I saw men moving horses through the wash. They covered the brands with wet clay. One laughed too loud. White men laugh like they own the night. Crowder. I know his hat. I know his silver spurs. I know the way men stand when they think no one can name them. Nate looked at the map, then at her coat. Frost had begun melting from the fringe, dripping onto his floor in small dark spots. Why not go to the sheriff? She looked at him as if he had asked why snow was cold. Would he write my words down, or would he count my arrows first? Nate had no answer worth speaking. Sheriff Gideon Hale was not a cruel man, but Mercy Crossing had a way of making decent men small when the crowd got loud. Iona folded the map again. I ran because Crowder saw me see him. If I reached Redwillow, he could not shape the story alone. But the storm came hard. My horse went lame 3 miles back. Then lanterns followed. Nate heard it then. Not wind. Not the paper on the door. Hooves, faint and patient, moving somewhere beyond the cabin light. Iona heard them too. Her hand slid beneath the blanket. Nate did not need to see the knife to know it was there. He stood, slow enough not to startle her, and crossed to the window. Through the frost, he saw one lantern go dark behind the barn. Then another. Whoever waited outside had learned to hide their light. From the table, Iona whispered, They want you afraid before they knock. Nate reached for the coffee pot, filled his own cup, and watched the black surface shake once from a distant step on the porch. No, he said quietly. They want me ashamed. The porch board creaked once, then held its breath. Nate kept his cup in his hand and his eyes on the door, because a man looked different when he was not reaching for iron. Iona watched him from the table, the blanket pulled close around her shoulders, the hidden knife still somewhere beneath its fold. She was waiting to see which kind of white man he would become when other white men came calling. That was fair. Mercy Crossing had trained everyone to expect the smaller choice. The knock came slow. 3 taps. Polite as church bells, and just as hollow. Whittaker, a voice called through the wood. Porter Vance. Older than his courage. Younger than his hate. Open up. We only want words. Nate took one swallow of coffee. It had gone bitter and lukewarm. Words do not need 3 men standing in my snow. Silence answered first. Then another voice, smoother, carrying a smile it had not earned. Silas Crowder. No one is accusing you of anything, Nate. We are worried about you. A man alone can make mistakes when the weather turns. Iona's eyes narrowed. Nate saw recognition pass across her face like cloud shadow. He set the cup down. I am warm. I am sober. I am not in need of town charity. Then you will not mind letting us look around. Silas said it lightly, almost friendly, but the words scraped the room clean. Nate moved toward the door and stopped with his hand on the latch. He did not open it. Not yet. His cabin had been his father's before him, built from cottonwood and stubbornness, chinked with mud, smoke, and years of being left alone. Men who would not share bread with him at the saloon now wanted to cross his threshold in the name of concern. Behind him, Iona stood. Not fast. Not afraid. She set the cup down so softly the tin barely sounded. Nate spoke without turning. Stay by the fire. I do not hide well, she said. Then do not hide. Just do not give them the fear they came for. Something in her face changed at that. Not trust. Not yet. But attention. Nate opened the door the width of his boot. Cold shoved in, carrying snow and the smell of wet wool. Silas stood below the step with Porter beside him and a third man near the woodpile. Silas wore his black town coat buttoned high, his hat brim shining with ice, and his silver spurs bright enough to catch the lantern glow. Too bright for a man who claimed he had been searching muddy roads all night. His eyes slid past Nate's shoulder. So it is true. Nate did not move. Depends on what kind of truth you brought with you. Silas smiled. The kind that keeps towns safe. Towns do not get safer by freezing women outside. Porter shifted his feet. The third man looked away. Silas noticed both and tightened his smile. That woman is wanted for questioning over stolen horses. Questioning usually starts with a question. Fine. Where did she put them? Nate looked at him for a long second. That one sounds answered already. The wind ran between them. From somewhere in the dark, a horse stamped. Silas leaned closer, his voice lowering so only Nate and the doorway could hear. You keep her in there, folks will remember. They will remember every calf you sell, every fence you mend, every hand you ask to shake. Nate looked past him, toward the invisible town buried in snow, toward years of nods that were never friendship. A door means nothing if it only opens for your own kind. Behind him, Iona drew in one quiet breath. Silas heard it. His eyes sharpened. That sounds like something your father would have said. The name was not spoken, but it landed hard enough. Nate's hand tightened on the latch. Silas glanced at the cord around Nate's neck, where a small old charm rested beneath his shirt, warmed by skin and memory. Funny thing, Silas said softly. A man keeps the wrong keepsakes. People start asking what side his blood was on. Nate closed the door in his face before anger could answer for him. For a moment, there was only fire and breathing. Then Iona stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Nate's collar. The mark around your neck, she said. Show me. Nate did not reach for the charm right away. His hand stopped halfway to his collar, not because he feared Iona, but because some memories asked to be handled slow. The little thing had rested against his chest for 20 years, through cattle drives, winter fevers, lonely harvests, and all the quiet mornings when a man woke with no one left to call family. He looked toward the door. Outside, Silas Crowder and his men had not gone far. Their horses shifted beyond the cabin light, patient as bad news. Iona followed Nate's glance and understood. I am not asking as his friend, she said. I am asking as the daughter of Redwillow. The words carried no pleading. Just wait. Nate turned back. My father gave it to me the night before he died. Iona's face softened for less than a second, then guarded itself again. Then he knew it mattered. Nate slipped the leather cord over his head and held it in his palm. The charm was small, no bigger than a silver dollar, wrapped in old rawhide darkened by years of sweat and weather. At its center was a piece of pale blue stone, crossed with a sun-marked cut, so fine it looked less carved than remembered. Iona did not take it. She bent close, letting the firelight find the lines. Her breath caught, quiet but sharp. My mother made this. The cabin seemed to grow smaller around that sentence. Nate looked from the charm to her face. Your mother? Before I was born, before my father died, before Mercy Crossing had a name nailed to the depot. She touched one finger to the edge of the rawhide, careful as prayer. She made 3. One for herself, one for the child she hoped to carry, one for a white man she found in the snow near Redwillow Creek. Nate felt the floor shift beneath him, though he had not moved. His father had told that story only once, near the end, when fever had stripped the pride from his voice. A storm, a broken horse, a woman who carried fire in a clay pot and would not leave him to the cold. He had never said her name. Maybe he had not known it. Maybe shame had kept him from speaking it where walls could hear. He said she saved his hands first, Nate murmured. Said a working man without hands is only half alive. Iona looked at him then. Really looked. Not at his skin. Not at his door. At him. My mother said he would not stop thanking her, so she gave him that to make him quiet. A small breath moved through Nate. Almost a laugh, but too heavy to rise. For the first time that night, the fire did not feel like the only warm thing in the room. Iona stepped back. What was his name? Elias Whittaker. Her eyes lowered. My mother called him the man who kept a promise. Nate's throat tightened. What promise? Before she could answer, something struck the wall outside. Not hard enough to break wood. Hard enough to remind them what could break. Iona straightened. Nate closed his fingers around the charm. The old tenderness vanished from the room, replaced by the storm, the riders, the paper on the door, and the lie waiting in town. After he healed, Iona said, "Your father found out men were filing claims on Redwillow land. He said he would speak for us in front of the county judge. He said white paper should not be stronger than a living promise." Nate stared at the charm in his palm. "He never made it to court." "No," she said. "He did not." Outside, Silas called through the wind, pleasant as a banker on Sunday morning. "Nate, you have had your minute. Send her out, and this stays simple." Iona's hand drifted toward her pouch and the burned map within it. "That man knows more than stolen horses." Nate put the charm back around his neck, slower than before. Now it was not just a keepsake. It was testimony. "Then we stop answering his questions," he said, "and start asking ours." Nate crossed to the door with the charm still warm against his chest, and the storm waiting on the other side like a jury already seated. Iona stood behind him, no longer wrapped tight in the blanket like someone hiding from weather, but wearing it across her shoulders like a mantle she had decided not to be ashamed of. When Nate opened the door, the cold rushed in, and with it came the shape of Mercy crossing gathered beyond the fence. Not just Silas and Porter now. 15, maybe 20 people stood in the snow with lanterns held high, faces pale in the yellow light, boots planted in drifts as if standing together made each of them innocent. Sheriff Gideon Hale was there too, his gray mustache stiff with frost, his badge dull beneath a coat he had buttoned wrong in a hurry. He looked tired before he spoke. That was the trouble with decent men who waited too long. They always looked tired when the wrong thing finally reached their porch. Silas stepped forward first, carrying himself like the host of a sermon. "There she is," he said, not loud, but clear enough for every ear. "The woman half the county has been looking for." Iona did not lower her eyes. That alone made the crowd restless. Some folks wanted guilt to bow its head so they would not have to examine their own. Nate stepped down from the threshold and shut the door behind him, leaving Iona in the firelight at his back. "You found a cold woman in a storm," he said. "That is all you found." Silas lifted one gloved hand. From it dangled a strip of cloth marked with red-brown stains and stitched with crude shapes meant to resemble Apache pattern work. A sound moved through the crowd. Not a gasp. Something smaller and meaner. Recognition before thought. "Found this near my stable," Silas said. "Caught on a nail where the horses were taken. Apache cloth. Apache sign. Apache guilt." Sheriff Hale took the cloth, squinting under the lantern. He wanted evidence to be simple. Everybody did. Iona's voice came from the doorway, steady as a creek under ice. "That was not made by my people." Silas laughed once. "Convenient." "The thread is wrong," she said. "The edge is cut with shears, not stone or trade blade. The pattern faces west when it should face east. A child in my camp would be corrected for such poor work." A few heads turned toward the cloth again. Doubt entered quietly, like smoke under a door. Silas saw it and moved fast. "Listen to her. Pretty words for a thief." Nate's eyes hardened, but his hands stayed open at his sides. "Careful." Silas turned that smile on him. "Why?" "Because she sat by your fire one night, and now you fancy yourself her shield?" The crowd shifted. There it was. The real charge. Not horses. Not cloth. Not law. Shame. Silas pointed at the cabin. "A white man who shares a roof with an Apache woman has already picked his side." The words hung in the cold, ugly and pleased with themselves. Iona stepped out then, the blanket still around her shoulders, chin raised. Nate did not step in front of her. He stepped beside her. That was different. "My fire," he said. "My roof. My choice." Porter swallowed hard. Sheriff Hale looked at the ground. Silas's smile thinned. Nate reached for the stained cloth, and the sheriff handed it over without thinking. Nate brought it near his face, not touching the stain, only smelling what the cold had not taken. Years of calving sheds, branding pens, market days, and butcher wagons had taught him more truth than Silas expected. "This is not horse blood," Nate said. The crowd went quiet enough to hear snow ticking against lantern glass. Silas's eyes flicked once, just once, toward the woodpile. Nate saw it. So did Iona. Near the chopped cottonwood, half buried in fresh snow, something silver caught the firelight from the open door. Nate walked over, crouched, and lifted a broken spur rowel between two fingers. Fine work. Polished bright. Too fancy for any ranch hand standing there. Iona looked at Silas's boots. One spur was whole. The other was missing its shining wheel. The sheriff saw it next. Then Porter. Then everyone. Silas Crowder stopped smiling, and in that small silence, the night changed owners. Silas Crowder looked down at the broken spur rowel in Nate's fingers, and for the first time that night, his face forgot what shape confidence was supposed to take. It lasted only a heartbeat. Men like Silas lived by recovering quickly. He gave a soft laugh and spread his hands toward the crowd. A piece of metal in the snow proves nothing. Half the men in this county wear spurs. Nate held the little silver wheel up to the lantern light. It turned once between his fingers, bright, delicate, expensive. Half the men in this county do not pay extra for Mexican silver and brag on it every Saturday. Porter Vance looked down before he could stop himself. So did two others. Silas saw their eyes move and hated them for it. Sheriff Hale stepped closer, his boots crunching through the frozen crust. Silas, show your right spur. I will not be treated like some stable thief, because this woman tells campfire stories. Iona did not answer. She had learned young that truth wasted itself on men who only respected noise. Nate looked at the cloth again, then handed it back to the sheriff. That stain is pig blood. Not horse. Not man. Pig. The word landed plain and ugly. A few folks shifted. One woman near the fence pulled her shawl tighter, as if the cold had just found a new way in. You know that by smelling it. Sheriff Hale asked. I know it because I have cleaned enough butcher tables for credit when cattle prices went bad. Nate nodded toward Silas. Ask him where he got Apache cloth stitched wrong and pig blood on it before sunrise. Silas's mouth tightened. This is foolishness. Then prove it. The sheriff's voice surprised everyone, maybe himself most of all. It came out tired, but firm. Lift your pant leg. Silas looked past him to the crowd, searching for the old permission. Usually it waited there, ready and eager. Tonight it had started to thin. A lie could warm people for a while, but once doubt got inside, it made them feel the weather. Slowly, with a smile that showed no humor, Silas lifted the edge of his right trouser leg. His spur was missing its rowel. The leather strap hung loose, the tiny screw still caught in the buckle. Nobody spoke. Even the horses seemed to hold quiet. Porter whispered, Silas. It sounded less like a question than a door closing. Silas dropped his trouser leg. It must have broken while we were searching. Iona stepped forward, the blanket shifting with her. Searching where? Silas turned on her. You keep quiet. Nate's voice cut in low. No, just one word. But it changed the space between them. Iona reached into the pouch and brought out the burned map. She held it for Sheriff Hale, not Nate. That mattered. She was not asking to be saved now. She was giving evidence. Black Ash Canyon, she said. Old wash past the dead mesquite. He moved the horses there after dusk, covered the brands with clay. I saw 4 men. One wore those silver spurs. Sheriff Hale studied the map. The lantern shook in his hand, but his eyes did not. That canyon is 12 miles north. Silas scoffed. In the snow? You expect decent people to ride 12 miles because she scratches lines on paper. Nate looked toward the east. The storm had begun to loosen. A gray seam showed behind the clouds, not dawn yet, but the promise of it. No, Nate said. I expect decent people to ride because they almost judged a woman without asking why she ran. That hurt more than accusation. Some of them looked away. Some looked at Iona for the first time as if she had a name instead of a category. Sheriff Hale folded the map carefully. We ride at first light. Silas stepped back. You have no right. I have a badge, the sheriff said. Tonight I intend to remember what it is for. Far off, beyond the cottonwoods, a coyote called once and stopped. Nate saw Iona's shoulders ease, but only slightly. The truth had opened a trail. It had not carried them to the end. Then Porter, pale under his beard, pointed toward Silas's coat pocket. A dark smear marked the edge of the wool, same color as the stained cloth. Silas covered it with his hand too late. Sheriff Hale saw. Nate saw. Iona saw. And when the first thin light touched the snow, Silas Crowder looked less like a witness and more like a man running out of road. By the time first light reached Mercy Crossing, the storm had worn itself down to a whisper, leaving 12 miles of white road between Nate's cabin and Black Ash Canyon. Sheriff Hale rode in front with his coat collar turned up and the burned map tucked inside his vest. Nate rode beside Iona, not ahead of her, not behind her. That small arrangement spoke louder than most men's speeches. Behind them came Porter Vance, 3 ranch hands from the freight yard, Mrs. Bell from the boarding house wrapped in a buffalo coat, and half a dozen townsfolk who had shouted in the dark and now wanted to look useful in the morning. Silas rode, near the middle, quiet for once, his right spur strapped bare where the silver rowel should have been. Every few minutes, his eyes moved to the tree line, then back to the trail. Iona noticed. She noticed everything. The way snow held a print. The way a horse favored a left turn. The way guilty men looked at distances before honest men knew there was something to see. Nate leaned slightly toward her. "You see it. He is counting time," she said. "To what?" She looked ahead, where the land rose into a ridge of black stone and dead mesquite. To what he hoped would be gone before we arrived. No one spoke much after that. The cold made words expensive. Hooves pressed soft holes into the snow. Leather creaked. Breath steamed and vanished. When they reached the mouth of Black Ash Canyon, the sun was just high enough to turn every ice crystal to a small, hard shine. The canyon walls stood dark on both sides, streaked with old smoke stains from lightning fires long past. Iona lifted one hand, and without knowing why, every rider stopped. She dismounted and crouched near a patch of trampled snow beside the wash. Nate swung down after her, careful not to step where she looked. 4 horses came in, she said. More went out. Sheriff Hale asked. She shook her head. Not out. Deeper. Silas laughed from his saddle, but it came too late and too thin. Now she reads snow like scripture. Iona did not look up. Snow tells fewer lies than men. Porter muttered something that might have been agreement. They followed the wash around the bend, past the dead mesquite marked on the map. There, tucked behind a wall of rock, stood the missing horses in a narrow pen made from rope and cedar poles. Their brands were smeared with drying clay. A freight yard mare lifted her head and gave a low, tired sound. One ranch hand pulled off his hat. Mrs. Bell crossed herself without thinking. Sheriff Hale stared at the animals, and the years seemed to settle on his shoulders all at once. Silas, he said quietly, you told us Apache riders took them north. Silas looked at the pen, then at the faces around him. Someone set this up. Nate stepped to one of the horses and rubbed a thumb across the clay covering the brand. Beneath it was Crowder's own mark. Someone surely did. Near the cold fire pit, Iona found a scrap of wrapping paper from Crowder's store, grease-stained and folded around leftover biscuits. Near it lay a small wooden crate, half buried under a saddle blanket. Nate pulled it free. It was old, warped by damp, and marked with his father's initials burned faintly into the side. E.W. His hands went still. Iona saw the letters and said nothing. Sheriff Hale pried the lid open with his pocket knife. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth, land claims, witness notes, and a county summons dated 20 years back. Nate unfolded the top sheet. His father's handwriting covered the page, steady and plain. Elias Whittaker had written that Redwillow land was never abandoned, that the county records had been altered, and that a man named Silas Crowder had paid for false testimony. The canyon went silent. Not peaceful. Silent the way a room gets when the truth walks in without knocking. Nate looked up from the paper. Silas had backed his horse 3 steps toward the bend. Iona's voice came low beside him. He is not counting time anymore. Nate folded his father's testimony with care. No, he said. Now he is counting exits. Silas Crowder did not run. Running would have admitted too much. He only eased his horse backward one careful step at a time, wearing the same thin smile that had sold bad flour, false deeds, and cleaner versions of dirty stories to Mercy Crossing for years. Sheriff Hale saw him move. So did the others. But nobody reached for a weapon. The canyon had become something quieter than a standoff. It had become a weighing place. Nate held his father's papers in both hands, and for a moment he was not a cowboy standing in snow beside stolen horses. He was a boy again, listening through a bedroom wall while grown men lowered their voices whenever Elias Whittaker's name passed between them. He remembered his mother folding black clothes. He remembered Silas bringing sugar to the house and saying grief made people imagine things. He remembered believing him, because children believe the man who smiles when the town nods along. Iona stepped beside Nate, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her shoulder through the cold, not touching him, not claiming him, only standing where the truth needed a witness. Your father meant to carry those papers to the county judge, she said. Her voice was low, but every rider heard it. My mother waited by Red Willow Creek for 3 days. She had food packed for him. She had a horse ready. He never came. Nate looked at the summons again. The date sat there plain as a grave marker. He was going to speak for your people. For the land, Iona said. For the promise. Silas gave a small scoff. Old papers. Camp stories. A woman repeating what her mother wanted to believe. Sheriff Hale turned the oilcloth bundle over and found the county seal pressed in wax, cracked but still clear. His face changed then. Not quickly. Decent shame never moved fast. It had to pass through memory first. I signed the missing notice that year, he said. I was deputy then. Crowder told us Elias was seen riding south. Porter Vance lowered his hat against his chest. We all heard that. You all heard what I paid men to say. Silas snapped, then caught himself too late. The words hung in the canyon, bright as a dropped lantern. Mrs. Bell closed her eyes. One of the ranch hands whispered, Lord have mercy. Nate did not move toward Silas. That was what Silas seemed to fear most. Not anger. Stillness. A man who had finally found the shape of his grief and did not need to throw it. Silas looked from face to face, searching for the old crowd that used to gather around him like a warm stove. It was gone. In its place were people seeing themselves reflected in a lie they had repeated too easily. Iona bent and lifted the broken silver rowel from Nate's saddlebag, where he had placed it for safekeeping. She held it beside Silas's boot. The missing piece matched clean. Sheriff Hale took the rowel, the stained cloth, the burned map, and Elias Whittaker's testimony. Each item was small. Together, they were heavier than a rifle. Silas Crowder, the sheriff said, his voice rough but steady. You are coming back with me to answer before a judge. Silas looked toward Nate then, hatred dressed as injury. You would stand with her over your own town? Nate folded his father's papers and slipped them inside his coat, close to the charm around his neck. I am standing with the truth. It is just unfamiliar to you. For the first time, no one laughed for Silas. No one spoke for him. Sheriff Hale took his reins and led his horse toward the mouth of the canyon. The stolen horses shifted behind the cedar poles, breathing steam into the morning. Iona watched Silas pass, and there was no triumph in her eyes. Only an old tiredness beginning to loosen. Nate looked at her. Your mother should know. Iona nodded toward the ridge above Black Ash Canyon. Against the pale sky, 3 Apache riders sat watching in silence, their blankets dark against the snow. She already does, Iona said. She was waiting to see whether your father's promise still had a voice. They rode back to Mercy Crossing with Silas Crowder in the sheriff's keeping and the stolen horses walking behind them, their true brands washed clean by melted snow and morning light. No one sang. No one shouted. The town received the truth the way dry ground receives winter rain, slowly at first, then all at once. By noon, the horses were returned to their owners. By sundown, Sheriff Hale locked the evidence in the county strongbox and sent a rider south with papers for the judge. Folks who had stood outside Nate's cabin with lanterns now found reasons to look busy when Iona passed. Porter Vance took down the ugly note from Nate's door himself, pulling the horseshoe nail free with bare fingers until his hand shook from cold or shame. He tried to speak. Nate watched him struggle with the words, then saved him the trouble. Fix the hinge while you are there, he said. Porter nodded, grateful for work because work was easier than apology. 3 days later, the Red Willow riders came to Nate's cabin just before dusk. Not many. 7 horses, quiet as snowfall, with Iona riding at their center and an older Apache woman beside her, straight-backed beneath a dark wool blanket edged in red thread. Nate knew who she was before Iona said it. Some faces carried a story before the mouth opened. The woman dismounted and stood before him, studying his eyes, then the charm at his chest. Your father was cold when I found him, she said. Her English was careful, shaped by memory. But stubborn. Very stubborn. Nate swallowed. That sounds like him. He promised to carry truth where our words could not go. She looked toward the town, small and smoky in the distance. He did not fail. The road was stolen from him. Nate touched the charm. He left it for me to find again. The old woman reached into a beaded pouch and drew out a new leather cord, braided with red and brown strands. At its center was the same sun mark, woven small and patient. She tied it to the old charm with fingers steady from a lifetime of keeping sacred things from being lost. A promise can sleep, she said. It does not die. No one spoke after that. The fire inside Nate's cabin snapped softly, visible through the open door. Iona stood near the threshold, wearing the same wool blanket he had given her, now dry, folded neatly over one arm. She held it out. "This belongs to you." Nate looked at the blanket, then at the snow beginning to blue in the evening shadows. "Keep it." Her eyes searched his face. "For another storm? For any night that forgets mercy?" The old woman turned away then, not because she disapproved, but because some things were not meant to be watched too closely. The riders mounted and drifted back toward Redwillow Creek, leaving Iona behind for one quiet breath longer than custom required. She looked at Nate's cabin, at the smoke rising clean into the cold sky, at the second chair he had pulled near the hearth without explaining why. "Still room by the fire?" she asked. Nate set another piece of cottonwood on the coals. Sparks lifted and vanished. "Still room." "And the town?" she asked. From far away came the faint sounds of Mercy crossing, closing its shutters, softer now, less certain of itself. Nate looked toward those windows, then back at her. Let them learn to speak kinder, or let them stand outside with their words. Iona stepped in from the cold. Nate did not close the door right away. He let the firelight spill across the snow, across the old tracks, across the place where fear had once stood waiting. Out here, justice did not always arrive loud. Sometimes it came as a returned horse, a folded paper, a mended charm, a blanket kept without shame. And sometimes, when the world had done all the talking it could do, it looked like two chairs by a quiet fire, and nobody left outside who